Hi, everyone. This is John Daly. I'm here with my co host, Thomas D. Howes, for another episode of the Reagan Caucus podcast. Folks, we have been knocking it out of the park with our guests lately, and today we are doing it once again. He's a New York Times columnist and a co host of the Advisory Opinions Legal podcast over at the Dispatch. He's also very well known for his amazing pop culture takes. I'm talking, of course, about David French. David, thanks for joining the two of us today on the Reagan Caucus podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it's great having you on. We wanted to start off by asking you about the Gaza peace plan, or the ceasefire that went into effect about a week ago. It came after a long 2 years of the IDF doing an incredible amount of damage to Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran's nuclear program with our help. The remaining living hostages were finally returned home. Those videos were great to see. The Trump administration brokered the deal. I saw that you gave them some credit for that. David, what are your thoughts on both the ceasefire and where things go from here? It doesn't appear Hamas is going to abide necessarily by phase two.
Yeah, I've been trying to look for the right analogy to kind of cover how I feel about this moment, and I think I've got it. As an NBA fan, it's like watching somebody celebrate the championship after game one of the finals, is the way I would put it, after winning game one of the finals. So you have an unambiguously good thing here, which is the release of the hostages. But what we have agreed to, like what's agreed to by all parties right now, is very limited. It is a classic prisoner exchange. So there was about 20 hostages released, and the Palestinians got back, I think, over 1,000 prisoners, a partial Israeli withdrawal, and that's in a ceasefire. That is a normal part of this process that we've experienced over the last couple of years, a release of a few hostages, a ceasefire, a pullback to certain lines. But it was celebrated as if we've figured out peace in our time, and we're just not there yet. We're not anywhere close to there yet. I think it is absolutely a diplomatic achievement by the Trump administration to get so many people to line up beside his 20-point plan. I think that's a diplomatic achievement. But unless the major combatant, Hamas, agrees to it, we don't have it. And so, what we're watching right now looks like the very opposite of a group intending to disarm and give up power. They've emerged back out from the tunnels. They're wearing Hamas garb. They're executing people in the streets. They're carrying out attacks on rival militias. So I'm very skeptical about the long-term prospects here. I'm very grateful that there is a hostage release and a ceasefire. But we're very far from seeing this 20-point plan being enacted, much less agreed to. And what's puzzling is it's so many people I see are acting as if this 20-point plan it's been agreed to, and it hasn't been.
Yeah, I feel like the Trump administration has sort of presented it, as this extremely huge turning point. And again, it can't be, as you say, it can't be emphasized enough how great it is to have the hostages back home. But yeah, it's good to be, I guess, optimistic about what may happen there. But history shows this is going to be a bit more complicated than some are probably hoping for.
And I do think that the sort of sense of celebration, like we've done it now, and done right before the Nobel Peace Prize announcement and all of that stuff, is putting pressure on Israel, perhaps not to respond militarily if there are breaches in whatever agreement, to an extent an agreement exists, happen. So I do wonder if right now what we're watching is a situation where the Trump administration has put a lot of pressure on Israel to wind things down. Israel is winding things down, but now with all of that pressure, will they reverse course if Hamas stays in power? Because they had two war aims, remember. War aim, return the hostages. That's been accomplished, thankfully. War aim number two was to make sure that Hamas does not run the Gaza Strip. And right now it's looking like war aim number two is going to remain elusive.
Yeah, something to keep an eye on. I wanted to ask you, David, on a separate topic. about a new piece he wrote for the New York Times. It has to do with the Christian church in America.
Hmm.
According to the numbers, and you pointed this out in the piece, there has been what would seem, at least on its face, to be a positive trend in church attendance. It had been a long decline, but that decline has slowed, possibly even flattened. And also young adults, albeit modest numbers, are finding their way to the church. But you've been seeing some other things that concern you in all of this, David. Can you talk about that piece and what troubles you?
Yeah. Yeah, no, you set it up well. I mean, look, I think it's undeniable at this point that something is happening. And in other words, that something has changed what seemed to be, at least for a time, a kind of irresistible slide in American religiosity that for years and years, really since the end of the Cold War, there's been this long, steady slide in religious identification. And that appears at least, for the last couple of years or so to have leveled off. I mean, it will take 5 to 10 years before you know if there's any sort of big trend here. We've seen other pieces of information, like it was trumpeted online a lot in the last couple of days, that Bible sales are surging. There is this really interesting phenomenon where more Gen Z men appear to be diving into religion than women, which is a reversal of a lot of trends that have existed in years past. So something's definitely happening. The question is, what is it and how great is it, or how not great is it? And a lot of people have sort of thrown around the word revival. This is a revival of Christianity. So something like the Second Great Awakening, say. Well, massively premature to compare anything to the Second Great Awakening, massively premature. However, what if something is happening, what do you call it? And I think that, one of the things that I see is a real confusion that exists in people's minds between a religious revival and a religious revolution, sort of a political/religious revolution. There is evidence of revival out there. For example, in 2023, you saw a really remarkable revival at Asbury College. This is something that Asbury is a place that's had revivals before. I was there in early 2024, just after the revival ended. Really wonderful sort of to see like these students, repenting of their sins and transgressions. Really just a faith community alive with humility and compassion. It was really wonderful to see exactly everything you would think that you would see in the aftermath of a revival. But a lot of what we're seeing and a lot of the religious fervor that we're seeing isn't so much revivalistic, which rests on repentance. In other words, I have sinned. The revivalist says, I have sinned. It's a lot more reminiscent of sort of religious revolution, which is much more likely to say, you have sinned. You have sinned. And I am here as sort of the instrument of justice and vengeance. And so you see a lot of that in sort of what you might call MAGA Christianity, which you do not want to confuse with all of evangelicalism or all of any American Christian tradition. But in this kind of very MAGA subset, you see a real will to power, an embrace of dominionism or integralism or various other forms of theology/political philosophy that embrace religious power, the union of religious power and state power. And so that's not a revival. That's not a revival. That looks a lot more like a kind of revolutionary spirit. And you can confuse the two in some ways because revolutions can fill stadiums. So can revivals. Revolutions introduce a lot of religious fervor. So do revivals. It's just where is the emphasis? What is the emphasis? If the emphasis is you're the problem, you have to pay, that's not a revival. A revival is when I say I'm the problem, I have to change. And that's a very different thing.
Yeah, it's the term you use, MAGA Christianity. I know people, when you write about that, a lot of Christians sometimes take offense. They don't like hearing it phrased that way. And I don't. I know I'm a Christian. I don't. I get this. I see this sort of in my own life. My wife and I have friends who left their church because it basically became this vehicle for Donald Trump. They were handing out campaign materials for him and everything, and it just felt so inappropriate. And we have another church on the edge of our town, and it has this big digital marquee out front saying, pray for Trump above the text, truth lives on, which, I have no problem with, people praying for the president of the United States. The problem is that this sign was there throughout the entire Biden administration when Trump was even in power, and no mention of Biden whatsoever.
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah, and maybe that sort of thing brings some people to those churches. I don't know, but yeah, it's a real thing. I mean, it's not like I live in the South or anything. I'm in northern Colorado here, so it's a thing, and it is pretty troubling. But I'm definitely glad you're writing about this topic, because I think it is important. I think people need to think about it.
Yeah, and a lot of people who belong to sort of traditional denominations, let's say you're a PCA Presbyterian or a Southern Baptist, in all likelihood, in your church, when I write about MAGA Christianity, in all likelihood, you're not going to see a lot of it. You might see some of it. You might have a few members of your congregation who are just deep, deep, deep into MAGA. They're kind of known for that. Other people in the congregation might think, well, okay, Bill's a little too much into Trump, and and the majority of people in the congregation are just normal folks. Probably overwhelming percentage of them are Trump voters, but normal folks, the kind of people you'd want to have as your neighbors, just, regular folks. Like I've spent the entire Trump years living until very, very recently in very deep red Trumpy areas of the country. And this idea that everybody's MAGA and cruel and all of that's just completely wrong. There's just a lot of normal folks out there who looked at the choices and said, I'm taking Trump over Harris. And, as I tweeted before the election, good people will vote for Trump, good people will vote for Harris, bad people will vote for Trump, bad people will vote for Harris. You can't assign the vote as a proxy, right, for a person's character. So, but there is a strain of MAGA Christianity that is extremely zealous. It is often coming up in non-denominational Pentecostal / charismatic parts of the world that are not very well represented amongst the elite commentariat. They're not very well represented on Twitter, for example, where you have got a lot of Baptist and Presbyterian people who fight about theology, Catholic intellectuals, etc. Now, when you're talking about the non-denominational, New Apostolic Reformation, sort of Pentecostal Christianity, that is, by and large, outside of the corridors of the American elite and outside the sort of the corridors of American popular culture. And so it's easy to miss how huge it is and how important it is and how zealous it is. And there was a great report that we published not long ago about this very thing that was talking about the incredible influence of the independent charismatic movement on Trumpism. And what's so different about it? Well, one of the things that's so different about it is in this movement, Trump isn't just the best of bad options, the lesser of two evils. No, he is appointed by God to save America, that there are prophecies out there that this is God's man to save America. So we're talking about a level of zeal that if you are opposing Trump, by definition, you are standing in opposition to God's revealed plan as revealed through his prophets. And that is a level of fanaticism that is going to be unrecognizable to a lot of what you might call, quote unquote, normie Christians. But it is out there. It is ferocious. And it's far more prevalent than a lot of people would like to think.
I would definitely recommend people read that piece. I want to bring Thomas in into the conversation for some questions. Go ahead, Thomas.
It's interesting you say that about your perspective on the Protestant side, because over on the Catholic side, it's a similar thing. There's all this excitement about new people coming into the church and all that from the youth. There was one of the people who works over at the Dispatch with the videos, Victoria Holmes. She makes these small videos about radicalism, because she's Catholic, like I'm Catholic, and she makes these small videos about the young Catholics and some of the trends. And she said, I mean, one of the videos she made implied it was a mixed bag. It was, some very severe conversions happening and whatever. And I'm sure there's some sincerity of conversion also on the other side, but a lot of people, followers of like Nick Fuentes and that's very strongly anti-Semitic. They memory problem that we have.
Yeah.
And there seems to be a lot of that, and a lot of the more sort of elite and intellectual Catholics are sort of not aware of it. Whereas sort of the radical trends among the intellectual Catholics, there are those too. They tend to avoid racialism and anti-Semitism and all of that. It's interesting to hear that, like, you're similar with like the sort of the Pentecostalism or whatever, but some of the trad folk Catholicism is also dealing with some of this. But some of them get so radical that they actually don't even like Trump. Like Fuentes is criticizing Trump for being too supportive of Jews, and he's actually implied that he prefers Newsom to J.D. Vance because of J.D. Vance's Indian wife, which is, it's very, I don't know how that fits into horseshoe theory or whatever, but
yeah. One way I'd put the difference is the Catholic integralists can fill hotel conference rooms.
Yeah.
And the independent, the Pentecostal prophets can fill stadiums.
Oh, wow.
But the difference is, in the conference room, you could have some professors, some law professors, some professors of major. So that sort of hyper trad Catholicism punches above its weight in pop culture, in part because you do have some cultural intellectual elites that are part of that world. Whereas I don't know of a single, Harvard law professor or Notre Dame professor, to sort of take some non-random examples, who would be a part of the New Apostolic Reformation. And so, if you're in, say, a Times reader, I would say it's more likely you may have heard about some of the Catholic traditionalism because of its presence in the intellectual class, and much less exposure to the New Apostolic Reformation, even though one is just infinitely larger than the other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And but kind of connected with that, I just wanted to get with this one question. And James M. Patterson and I are finishing up this book on post-liberalism of the Catholics. And so you came into our attention a few times related to this because of your debate with Sohrab Ahmari a few years ago. And then Sohrab Ahmari wrote this article afterwards saying against David Frenchism. I mean, that's kind of almost a compliment, right? I mean, nobody's written a book or an article like against Thomas Houseism or against John Dalyism. So there's something there that you could take from it. But did you ever consider writing an article back against Sohrab Ahmariism?
No, no. The whole notion that this became some sort of thing personalized around me is really bizarre. However, until you realize that if virality often depends on a beef, right? So if you had, why am I blanking? The beef between Drake and Kendrick Lamar, okay? And let's suppose you had, instead of this very personal attack, right, back and forth, instead you had Drake and Kendrick Lamar writing competing essays on their respective philosophies of hip hop without ever interacting with each other, it would get a fraction of the attention than if you go directly at somebody. And so what was interesting about that moment was this was coming right after, I believe there had been a kind of a group letter called Against the Zombie Consensus or something like that. It was very directly aimed against Reaganism, that essentially we have to turn the page on Reaganism. And I mean, a few people paid attention to it, but it didn't set the world on fire. And then Sohrab comes along and basically repackages a lot of that into the Against David Frenchism essay. And so it had really two elements. One was just a full frontal attack on classical liberalism, which was sort of the guts of it, the core of it. And then an attack on me personally as some sort of avatar of classical liberalism, and which I'm very happy to be an avatar of classical liberalism. Like, I mean, I didn't even know I was signing up for that when I started writing and litigating and all of that. No, I'm very happy to be an avatar of classical liberalism. I'm not happy to be strawmanned into a caricature of something that I'm not. But the reality of the debate really, in many ways, was, I think that it was personal beefing at me in maybe, I don't know, a kind of cynical stab at virality, and somehow it worked. I think it landed on a very low, one of the very few low information, like uncontroversial news cycles in Trump 1.0. And it just exploded. So for weeks, it was just everywhere. What do you think about David Frenchism? And it was weird. It was weird. And then it culminated in the debate at Catholic University that got pretty contentious. But I think what ultimately was happening here was elevating a philosophical beef into a personal beef to boost the visibility of the philosophical beef. But then one of the tail end consequences of that is then I sort of become a hate object from that point forward. So I get an outsized level of hatred, in part because as a tail end consequence of the personalization of a philosophy into sort of me. And so that, I think that it was a very successful stab at virality that has had some pretty interesting long-term consequences.
Yeah, unfortunately too, they just sort of, nobody really watched the debate. They got the sound bites, and somehow you got connected with Drag Queen Story Hour, as if you have any interest in promoting that at all.
Yeah, I mean, that was the weirdest thing of the whole, because the whole thing started in like May of 2019, when Sorba Mari just tweeted out of nowhere about some Drag Queen Story Hour in Sacramento, California, and then said there's no polite David Frenchian way through this. And I'm like, what even is a Drag Queen Story Hour? I don't even know what that is. I wasn't tracking it as an issue. They are very small events held not very frequently. I think one of the largest Drag Queen Story Hours ever had just a couple of hundred attendees. I mean, this is a very, very small, minor thing. Wasn't on my radar screen. And I'm a First Amendment attorney. I've been spending my entire career defending free speech, including a lot of free speech I don't like. And so unless there's something happening at the Drag Queen Story Hour that takes it out of the protected speech category, it's a pretty no-brainer. It's a matter of free speech. I'm not going to go. I would never go. They're not appealing to me at all. But somehow the fact that I defended the free speech rights of the people involved in Drag Queen Story Hour became just the symbol of my moral failing. And they took a statement I made and then twisted that statement and turned it into like David French endorses Drag Queen Story Hour. And what that statement was, something along the line, and even though I've written a bunch of, because I got nailed with this, I'd written a lot about it where I very clearly said, I don't like Drag Queen Story Hour, but it's protected expression. I said something in an interview in the New Yorker where I said something like, the ability to hold the Drag Queen Story Hour is a blessing of liberty. I was referring to the underlying free speech right, which it's a phrase I've used my whole life, my whole career, that there is a blessing, my whole professional life, blessings of liberty include, and then free speech, due process, etc., the various free speech doctrines like equal access. These are the blessings of liberty. And very, very obvious I'm talking in that context. Yeah. And that got twisted into somehow like, I think Drag Queen Story Hour itself is a blessing of liberty. And it actually became kind of a blessing the way they twisted it, because I was very quickly able to determine who's a good faith critic and who's a bad faith critic. Because I would never say that anybody who criticizes me is in bad faith. I mean, I make mistakes all the time. We should be critiqued. You get into this world, you should be critiqued. But there's also bad faith criticism, and one of the quickest ways to tell is if they twist that around.
So
Thomas, can I jump in there real quick for a second? Yeah, I was going to add, this is actually part of, I think what David's describing is as part of a broader condition, that has been running rampant online for several years now. I and others call it French derangement syndrome. Not the most original name, but David, you are at the center of it. And I'm convinced, just my observations, that there is pretty much nothing you can say or write that doesn't trigger thousands of terminally online individuals into having some kind of emotional breakdown or something. It's the damnedest thing to me, because I get how people can take exception with some of your views. You say things that people believe, were provocative. I don't agree with everything that you say, but
Right.
it's just it's yeah, literally, I think these people are habitually inclined to pull apart anything you say, or in some cases that you don't say enough in their view, just to find something to feel scandalized over. And if that isn't enough, then they'll just make up things about you to be offended by. But David, I'm curious, how do you deal with this? And are you optimistic that maybe RFK Jr. may one day discover what causes this condition in people?
I mean,
he's
RFK
really hitting
Jr.
out of the park lately. So.
I thought it was like some combination of vaccines and Tylenol, but maybe it's maybe it's those people who don't take vaccines or Tylenol who are most suffer for, I don't know, but
there is probably a correlation there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It is wild. It's wild. And John, it's even weirder than you're describing, because you said something interesting. You said everything that I write, they take off. No. If I write something that agrees with them, they don't ever talk about it or mention it, right? Because the story is he always punches left. He only punches left. He is constantly currying favor with the left. Well, that's news to the left, because, it's funny. It got to a point there for a while where I couldn't go to a university, whether it's a conservative Christian university or a liberal secular university, without somebody objecting to it. So I would go to conservative Christian universities, and people would try to get me canceled from the speech because they claim, I think, Drag Queen Story Hour is a blessing of liberty, so they trot that out. And then I would go to liberal universities, and they would try to get me canceled because I signed the Nashville Statement, which is a statement of traditional Orthodox Christian belief on sexuality. And so these people on the right are like, he's totally currying favor on the left. And meanwhile, the left is protesting me being hired by the Times. So it's a weird thing, because the right, which around 2019 decided that I'm the MAGA right, that I'm to be a hate object. What that means is anything that I say or write about, say, trans participation in sports, or youth gender medicine, or arguing for upholding Florida's 6 heartbeat bill, or arguing in support of the Dobbs decision, or taking on all the excesses of DEI repeatedly and consistently, or taking on anti-Semitism in college campuses. All of that doesn't exist. None of that exists. The only thing that exists is me taking on Donald Trump. And so that's what contributes to this, and to a great deal. So there's just a lot of people out there who now think that I only and always and ever and exclusively take on the Trump right. And that creates this twisted, distorted view. And I'll tell you a kind of an amusing story. I was at an event in DC not long ago, and a woman who actually is relatively senior at a conservative think tank came up to me, and she said, I have a bone to pick with you. And I was, okay, about what? Your position on trans issues. And I was like, okay, I'm happy to talk about that. But before we do, what is my position on trans issues? Please explain it to me so that I can know where we're starting from. And what she then said was completely wrong. And I said, where did you get that? Like, where did you get that? Did you read me? And the answer was no. She had gotten it from like Daily Wire personalities talking about me or whatever on Twitter. And, it was a number one, not surprising, because this is, just the way things are now. But number two, think about that. Would you ever walk up and confront somebody about an issue that they've written about extensively without reading what they'd written about it? It's just, but Twitter had decided this thing. And so it's very strange. It's very strange. And you asked how I deal with it. When I figure out exactly the best way to deal with it, I'll let you know. It's a weird, hard thing to deal with. I got to be honest.
I do my part to sort of mock it online because it really does
Yeah.
sort of, I find it's wild to me. And people say, well, how can you defend David French? I'm like, it's pretty easy. I mean, if you guys are just making up stuff about him or having a meltdown over everything he says, it doesn't really even require a defense. It's just weird. But yeah, I know I'm happy to always to point that out where I see it. I wanted to throw it back over to you, Thomas. And also, I think, Thomas, I wanted to mention your microphone seems like it's a little muffled. I don't know if you might want to speak up a little bit with the next question, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. Is this better?
A little bit. It sort of feels like you're calling in on a radio show.
Sorry.
It is what it is.
In a hotel,
long time, first time. Thomas, go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I apologize to the listeners. I'm in a hotel room and I didn't bring my microphone. So I'll try to speak up. So what you're saying then, David, is that you did not endorse Drag Queen Story Hour, but you also don't think that it's worth having a Protestant Franco to start cracking heads and throwing people in jail over either.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
So that's
I'm not going to light the
position.
First Amendment on fire I'm not going to light the First Amendment on fire to stop the drag queens, is another way of putting it.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what I thought. That's how I interpreted it, but what I know.
Yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to I'm blanking now on my question. I got caught up on the microphone thing. John, do you have anything right now so I can recoup?
Yeah, no, I do. I'm sorry to throw you off there, Thomas, but David, I wanted to ask you about a recent controversy concerning chat room conversations that were leaked and published last week by Politico. I guess it would be this week. We're recording it, but by the time this airs, it'll be last week. But there were, they were between the leaders of young Republican groups, and they were chock full of jokes, racist ones, Hitler praise, rape jokes, slavery jokes, putting opponents in gas chambers jokes, a lot of bad stuff. Now, I will say to their credit, the Young Republican National Federation Board of Directors fully denounced the behavior and called for resignations. So did other prominent Republicans. So, hats off to them. One prominent Republican who did not do that was Vice President J.D. Vance. He basically excused it all, saying that the texts from Jay Jones, the Democratic Virginia Attorney General candidate, were worse, and so he wasn't going to join the pearl clutching over the young Republicans. David, what do you think first about what we're learning about the young Republican culture, and also the inclination by some GOP leaders, including J.D. Vance? Matt Walsh is another one. He's not a GOP leader, but he's influential figure on the media right. Their inclination to just kind of what about it, or say that we need to band together to take on the left with pretty much any bad actor on the right.
Yeah, I mean, there was a part of me when this broke, I was like, here we go again. This was not a new story. I mean, this is something that it feels like every 6 to 8 to 9 months, another group chat story leaks out, and it's crazy right-wing stuff that's happening. I mean, in 2023, I wrote a story about, the title was about the lost boys of the American right after another one of these leaked group chat stories came out. This is something that's been going on since the rise of the alt-right in 2016. You can go back again and again and again and again, and you can find these stories about people and their leaked group chats and how gross and racist and anti-Semitic and everything that they are. But the difference is previously you didn't have the Vice President of the United States of America going, yes, stop being upset at them. It's no big deal. After the same person in administration had gone with both barrels, after include young people as well who had not responded appropriately in their view to Charlie Kirk's assassination. So you have this absolute double standard working here where you're going to say, hey, boys will be boys about like a 30-year-old who actually has a professional job in politics. And then if it's like a second grade teacher in Portland saying something they don't like about Charlie Kirk, well, they got to lose their job. Like that, they got to go. But that's the current friend enemy distinction. You know, for my friends, everything; for my enemies, the law. I mean, we're just seeing this play out. But I think that there's a bigger story here other than this is just another group chat. It is, if you have at the very top of the American political pyramid and the most successful, unarguably most successful politician of the last 10 years is a man of Donald Trump's character and disposition, you should not be surprised if the entire culture of your political enterprise starts to take on the character of its most popular and most powerful figure. And so what we are going to be dealing with, we're way past the time now, guys, where we can say, well, you know, when Donald Trump leaves the scene, then nature will start to heal, maybe. But Donald Trump has changed nature over the course of these 10 years. And by the time he leaves office in 2029, it will have been almost 14 years since he came down the escalator. That means shaping an entire generation of American politics, especially American politics on the right, into a belief that anything goes, that there is no such thing as too much aggression, that any kind of restraint, moral restraint placed on the actions of, you know, our right-wing politicians, so long as they're right on the politics, is inherently unjust, that the other side is always worse. I mean, these are the kind of values that are being deeply, deeply, deeply inculcated. And so, you know, it's like, imagine if the country elected Hugh Hefner as president, and then everyone was shocked to find out that the GOP got more porn friendly. Like, you know, I mean, this is what we're dealing with here. It's you elevate this man with his character and temperament for a decade plus as the dominant figure of American politics, and you're going to have his mini-me's all over the place. So none of this should surprise anybody.
Those are good points, and I will, you know, it is interesting that I would say when in people there is the comparison there between this Jay Jones, because they happen so close together and they're similar. You know, I will, you got to hand it to the GOP in one respect, is that a lot more people have denounced the young Republican stuff from the Republican Party that Democrats have denounced Jay Jones. I know you spoke out strongly against Jay Jones, David. I believe you asked you.
Yeah, he should drop out.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. So, you know, it's interesting. You saw this really interesting split because you saw a lot of sort of left-leaning commentators and pundits and that, you know, sort of the commentary class. Yeah, Jay Jones should get out, but not a lot of Democratic politicians saying that. And there were some pretty gruesome moments in the debate between, you know, Winsome Earl Sears and Abigail Spanberger, where she just looked like a deer in the headlights talking about the Jay Jones situation. So the idea that any of this is exclusive to the right is just wrong. As a general matter, what is happening is we're seeing a sense in the escalation of the stakes of our politics, so much so that it's now like, well, even if I don't like that Jay Jones sent those texts, that at least he's not a Republican. And then you have that same calculation on the other side. Well, I don't like that Republican politician A, B, C, or D did this, but at least they're not a Democrat. So this sort of ultimate sin is being a person on the other side of the aisle, and everything else is forgivable so long as you're confronting the person on the other side of the aisle. And here's the grim stuff, guys. The politicians who depend on their bases turning out, I think might be a little bit ahead of a lot of the commentators and pundits on understanding where the American people are. And here's a super grim thing. A lot of American people are totally fine with harming their opponents. They're totally fine with their opponents being harmed. And yeah, it's still a minority. It's still a minority of Americans. But I guarantee you, they're disproportionately represented in the activist bases of both parties. And so if you're a politician, what the number one message you're going to be hearing more than any other right now is fight, 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 fight. Fight, fight, fight. Take off the gloves. Go at them. Go at them. That's the number one message you're hearing. You're not hearing on a day-to-day basis from the exhaustive majority that's saying these death threats are awful. This constant conflict is terrible. That's not who they're hearing from. They're hearing every day from fight, 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 fight. And so a lot of them get this, and I don't think irrationally, get the view that if I do a Sister Souljah moment like Bill Clinton did, I'll lose enough of my base to where I'll lose the election. And I think that that's the calculation. And here's what's super depressing. They might not be wrong. They might not be wrong. And that's why, you know, I feel like if we're looking at this miserable political age and we're just blaming the politicians, we're doing it wrong, because these politicians are in many ways reflecting back to us what their activist bases are pouring into them. And so,
especially the primary electorates.
Oh, for sure.
Select the candidate. So even though a lot of people get to the general electorate and they're not happy with either pick, those people sat out the primary, so they didn't have a say in who got the candidate. So more of those normal people that don't want the violence against the other side need to show up to one of the primary primaries, depending on, you know, which party they lean on.
Yep. There's two numbers I talk about all the time, 17 million and 77 million. So 17 million is the number, and oh gosh, all of a sudden I'm losing confidence. Is it 15 or 17? I can't, well, anyway, it's in the teens of millions of people who turned out to vote for Trump in the contested Republican primary, and 77 million, 78 million, that's right in that neighborhood is what he got in the general election. So that tells you the gap, the size of the gap in the primary electorate versus the general electorate. And so a lot of what we're dealing with is the general electorate and the primary electorate are two different things. And for a lot of people who are in that general electorate and not the primary electorate, they're saying, how did we get these candidates? Well, I'll tell you one reason we got them, because you didn't show up in the primary, because nobody forced them on you. You could have voted.
Amen. I had just one last thing, David, because you're a remarkably calm individual. You don't look like I mean, I could imagine a lot of people in your position who's been such a target of millions of people hating on you for, you know, false accusations could look kind of rattled, like beat up, you know, sort of what's
black eye, little bloody nose.
Black eye.
Yeah.
Just sort of bitter, maybe, but you don't appear any of that. So what has the last few years been like for you? Have you always been kind of a shrug it off kind of person, or what do you have to say about that?
I would say to some degree. I mean, you know, this isn't my first rodeo in getting blowback. I mean, when I was in law school, I got shouted down in class when I would raise conservative points. I mean, I formed a pro-life club at the law school in 1991, and I get messages in my mailbox, like physical messages from classmates saying, "Why don't you go die, you effing fascist?" You know, and as I tell everybody when I tell that story, these were not death threats. They were death aspirations, you know, like not, I'm going to kill you, just you need to die somehow, you know, so it was.
So it wouldn't pass the Brandenburg test for incitement.
It was not incitement, and it was not a true threat. Yeah. So these, you could tell these law students thought this through, and so off and on for years, I would find myself in the crosshairs just because of the nature of the work that I did, a pro-life attorney, religious liberty attorney. So I never had the sense that entering into the public arena meant anything other than occasionally receiving some really bruising blowback, but nothing like the last several years. I mean, nothing before that, nothing like it. But I'll say there's a couple of things that really help you in these circumstances. One is I just have an incredible supportive and loving family. So, you know, where things matter the most at home and with my close friends, things are, you know, I have very, very wonderful friendships. I have a wonderful marriage, a wonderful family. And so when you have that kind of grounding, it's amazing what you can absorb. If you don't have it, I feel like you're just much more vulnerable. And then the other thing is, people see my Twitter feed, they don't read my email inbox, and they're very different. So the Twitter feed is where people just unload on me, except for John. John is, he's planted a flag out there. I will not allow you to destroy David on my watch. And I love it.
Right. That's right.
But on Twitter, people unload on me. But in the inbox, I get message after message after message after message that says something like that. Like, I thought I was alone until I discovered you. I realized there's more of us. You know, thank you for sort of keeping the faith on, you know, what it means to be a conservative, or defending, you know, the gospel against Christian nationalism. You know, I get so much support from people who don't want to leave these public messages, in part because they're going to get just annihilated. They have no, or from people who, they don't even know about it. Like, they don't know about all these Twitter beefs and things like that. And so it is not the case that my life is just one unrelenting hellscape of horror and attacks. And it's the case that I also get an awful lot of like really genuine and kind support in a way that like, it's a tremendous blessing. I mean, very few people ever in their lives get to read some of the emails that I've read. And so if I just focused on the negative, it would probably leave me just like in the fetal position. But you look on the holistic whole, and there's just a lot to be thankful for.
I think we all need more of that gratitude. I think that would probably solve a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
True. Well, that's probably a good place to end it, David. You've been very generous with your time. We very much appreciate it. We want to thank you for coming on the Reagan Caucus podcast. It's always great talking to you. We appreciate your insight, and we hope you'll come on again sometime in the future. Yeah,
I'd love that. Thanks. I appreciate it very much.
Sure thing. And for everybody else, thanks for tuning in. If you watch today's episode on YouTube, as always, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple or some other audio platform, please like and subscribe as well. And we will see you next time on the Reagan Caucus podcast.